What if every big scramble in your life, job moves, business bets, relationship choices, stopped feeling chaotic and started feeling like chess? Strategic thinking is the quiet muscle that turns reactive panic into calm advantage. In this video, you'll learn the exact frameworks top leaders use to spot leverage, map second-order consequences, and design moves that pay off years later. No fluff, no buzzwords, just practical mental tools you can use today to outthink complexity and win with less noise. Stay until the end. One framework here will change not just what you choose, but how you see the whole board. Chapter 1. Seeing the board. From problems to playing fields. Strategic thinking begins with a simple reframe. Stop seeing your situation as a problem that must be solved now, and start seeing it as a playing field full of moves, counters, and lines of advantage. This chapter trains your eye to map environments quickly and precisely so that you can spot asymmetry where others see only noise. Start with boundary drawing. Define what is inside your influence and what is outside it. Then sketch the actors, their incentives, and the resources they control. Use the power question, who gains if nothing changes? That question flips default narratives because most systems favor inertia. Recognizing the beneficiaries of the status quo reveals where leverage is possible. Next, shift from single-issue focus to pattern recognition. Look for repeated dynamics across domains, supply constraints, attention bottlenecks, incentive misalignments, and borrow solutions that worked in other contexts. A marketing problem might be a logistics problem in disguise. A hiring crisis might be a cultural design signal. Chapter 2. Leverage. Finding the small edge that scales. If strategy had a religious text, its first commandment would be leverage. A tiny, well-placed move that multiplies outcomes is the heart of strategic advantage. This chapter teaches how to hunt for leverage systematically rather than by accident. Start by inventorying your assets: attention, relationships, technology, capital, reputation, and process. For each asset, ask how a 1% improvement cascades. For example, improving onboarding time by 10% might reduce churn, lower acquisition costs, and free capacity for product work. The multiplier effect is the metric you want to optimize. Next, embrace optionality. Design moves that create more choices for you later rather than consuming choices now. Options cost little but can become priceless when the environment shifts. Use staged investments and small pilots to buy information without burning capital. Another strategy is complementarities. Combine weak assets so together they become strong. A niche audience plus a high-signal newsletter plus a small paid product turns diffuse attention into recurring revenue. Chapter 3. Mapping incentives, the true geometry of influence. People and organizations act for reasons, and those reasons are driven by incentives: material, emotional, and reputational. Strategic thinkers map incentives like architects map load paths. When you align or bend incentives, you shape behavior without brute force. Start by observing what people actually do rather than what they say they value. Incentives reveal themselves in repeated choices. Next, create incentive triangles: who benefits, who pays the cost, and who enforces the rules. Many conflicts resolve when you rebalance those corners. The chapter gives practical templates: convert abstract goals into specific incentives, bonus structures that reward leading indicators rather than lagging reports, customer return programs that refocus product teams on retention, or small public commitments that make behavior change reputationally costly to violate. Beware perverse incentives. Short-term metrics often generate long-term harm. Design your scorecards with guardrails that penalize gaming. Another tool is subtle reframing. Turn an ask into an aligned opportunity by changing the language and the payoff structure. If you want a collaborator to share data, offer a small data co-op that offers reciprocal insight rather than a cold request for help. The final section covers enforcement architecture, social norms, transparent metrics, and simple escalation paths. Chapter 4. Scenario Thinking. Preparing for multiple futures. Good strategy is probabilistic. Instead of a single forecast, adopt scenario thinking to prepare for multiple plausible futures. This chapter explains how to build 3 credible scenarios: conservative, baseline, and disruptive, and design hedges for each. Start by identifying drivers of change, technology shifts, regulatory moves, cultural trends, and competitor behaviors. For each driver, estimate high and low outcomes and then stitch those together into internally coherent narratives. The point is not to predict precisely, but to expand your anticipatory range. Next, assign simple trigger signals for each scenario, detectable events that indicate the direction of change so you can move early. For example, a regulatory filing, a major customer migration, or a talent exodus are early warning signals. Use trigger signals to pre-commit contingency plays. When X happens, execute Y within Z days. This reduces decision friction during volatility. Scenario thinking also clarifies optionality allocation, how much reserve to keep for each scenario and which capabilities to hedge. The chapter offers a pragmatic exercise. Create 3 one-page scenarios for your project, list the top 5 implications for your operations, and select 2 small plays that are cheap to implement but preserve options across scenarios. Scenario practice makes strategy resilient and turns surprise into advantage. Chapter 5. First Principles and Inversion. Clear foundations for complex problems. When complexity clouds judgment, return to first principles and inversion. First principles break problems into irreducible truths. Inversion asks what would make your desired outcome impossible. This chapter sharpens both tools with applied examples. Begin by distilling assumptions, strip away jargon and inherited solutions, and ask what must be true at the most basic level for success. For a product launch, that could mean identifying the exact job the customer hires your product to do. Inversion then tests robustness. Imagine actions that would guarantee failure and design counters. Often, inversion highlights fragile dependencies and prompts simpler, more durable designs. The chapter walks through a rapid protocol, state objective, list 5 core assumptions, invert each assumption to see failure modes, and then design simple mitigations. This method prevents confirmation bias and surfaces cheap fixes early. Use these tools in combination. First principles to generate creative options, inversion to test and harden them. The result is strategy that is both imaginative and defensible. Chapter 6. Resource allocation. Priorities, trade-offs, and ruthless focus strategy is resource economics. You cannot do everything, so allocation rules determine outcomes. This chapter gives a framework for prioritizing where to place time, money, and human capital. Start with impact per effort mapping. Estimate the expected return and the required effort for each initiative, and then rank by expected return divided by effort, not by emotion or visibility. Next, Enforce resource fences, protect the top 2 initiatives with dedicated teams and budgets, and treat everything else as optional. Fences create depth and prevent distraction. The chapter introduces time-boxed experiments for medium priority ideas so they don't consume full resources prematurely. Another principle is marginal utility decline. Spread resources until returns diminish, and then concentrate where marginal returns are highest. Finally, build a quarterly kill switch. Systematically review projects and terminate those not achieving early indicators. Resource allocation is ruthless kindness. It forces honest choices that preserve capacity for what matters. When you commit capital with clear rules, you free attention for executing the few things that move the needle. Chapter 7. Competitive positioning. Create unassailable spaces. Positioning is not marketing craft, it is strategic engineering. This chapter explains how to identify and occupy spaces where competition is weak or misaligned. Start by mapping competitor strengths and blind spots, customer pain points, and regulatory or distribution constraints. Then ask where you can build barriers, unique processes, exclusive partnerships, curated brands, or network effects that raise the cost of imitation. Positioning also involves choosing where not to compete. Niche focus can create durable premiums. The chapter covers 3 positioning plays: dominate a narrow niche, control a critical distribution channel, or create a superior customer experience that becomes the market reference. Each play requires aligning product, pricing, and story coherently. Finally, monitor mobility. How easy is it for others to enter your space? If mobility is high, accelerate capability building and lock-in. If low, invest in customer education and slow expansion to solidify position. Chapter 8. Strategic communication. Framing, narratives, and influence. Strategy moves faster when others interpret your moves the way you intend. This chapter teaches how to craft simple narratives that align stakeholders and diffuse resistance. Begin with a one-sentence frame that states the problem, the choice, and the benefit. Repeat that frame across channels to build coherence. Use narrative scaffolding, rationale, evidence, and visible early wins to convert skeptics. The chapter also covers audience segmentation. Different groups need different frames. Investors care about runway and scale. Teams care about clarity and process. Customers care about outcomes. Chapter 9. Execution. As strategy. Turning plans into operational advantage. Plans are only as good as their execution. This chapter focuses on the mechanics that turn strategic intent into sustained performance. Start with simple routines, daily check-ins, weekly cadences, and clear ownership for critical metrics. Use small buffers and decoupling so teams can act without constant handoffs. The chapter provides a lightweight operational playbook. Define objectives, assign owners with decision rights, run short feedback loops, and surface exceptions early. Emphasize learning velocity, quick experiments with clear hypotheses and measurable outcomes. Invest in capability building for the execution gap. Training, tooling, and small infrastructure that accelerates repeated tasks. Execution discipline compounds advantage because teams that execute reliably can iterate faster and capture opportunities competitors miss. Strategy without execution is a dream. Execution with adaptive feedback is a machine. Chapter 10. Reflection. Loops, measurement, learning, and adaptive strategy. Strategy must learn or it stagnates. This chapter builds the habit of reflection loops, regular cycles of measurement, learning, and adjustment. Define a few leading indicators tied to behavior change rather than vanity metrics. Run short postmortems that focus on decisions, not people, to surface root causes. Use experiments to convert questions into quantified bets and treat data as an ally, not an absolute. The final step is updating the plan. When feedback contradicts a prior assumption, change the model quickly and transparently. Adaptive strategy values speed of learning more than speed of arbitrary movement. Create scheduled pauses for synthesis and courageous pruning. Over time, these loops convert experience into institutional wisdom and ensure your strategic posture remains alive and effective. Chapter 11. Strategic Talent and Team Architecture. Great strategy collapses without the right people to build it. Strategic talent is not only about hiring stars, it is about designing team architecture so that skills, incentives, and decision rights align with the moves you need to make. Think of your team as a machine where each part must fit tolerances. Misaligned roles create friction, duplication wastes energy, and unclear authority paralyzes action. Start by mapping the critical capabilities your strategy requires in the next 12 months, and compare that to current capacity. Where are the gaps that, if left open, will choke your plan? Fill those gaps not necessarily with expensive generalists, but with precisely calibrated roles. Someone to own the leading indicators, someone to protect the cadence of execution, and someone to surface risks early. Next, design clear decision rights so people know what decisions they can make without escalation. Ambiguity kills momentum. A simple rule is to grant authority up to a bounded threshold and require rapid escalation only beyond it. This preserves speed while keeping oversight proportional. Incentives matter deeply. Reward structures must nudge the behaviors the strategy needs now. If you need long-term product quality, avoid short-term sales commissions that reward quick closures. Instead, design rewards around retention and customer health. Create compact feedback loops so learnings flow back into hiring and role design. If a role frequently calls for skills outside its charter, consider either expanding its remit or splitting responsibilities into more focused positions. Build guardrails against single-person dependencies by documenting tribal knowledge, rotating responsibilities occasionally, and cross-training critical functions. Hiring for fit is important, but do not confuse cultural fit with cultural ossification. Seek people who will stretch current norms rather than simply repeat them. Lastly, design onboarding and rapid acceleration paths so that new hires reach impact quickly. Provide a 90-day playbook that orients to priorities, metrics, and key relationships. Strategic teams are less about raw talent volume and more about the architecture that channels skill into leverage. When you build talent systems with clarity and accountability, you convert individual competence into organizational capability and make your strategy executable rather than merely aspirational. Chapter 12. Timing and Tempo in Strategic Moves. Timing is the invisible lever that multiplies strategy. The same action can be brilliant or disastrous depending on tempo and sequence. Strategic tempo means knowing when to accelerate, when to pause, and when to deliberately slow growth so you can consolidate advantages. Start by mapping the rhythms that matter for your domain. Product development cycles, customer buying windows, regulatory calendars, and competitor hiring seasons. Identify moments when being first yields outsized returns and moments when being the steady second mover preserves resources and reduces risk. Use small pilot windows to test timing assumptions. Instead of committing to a full rollout, run a tight experiment in a representative market to learn the tempo that customers prefer. Learn to sequence plays so that each move creates scaffolding for the next. For example, invest in distribution before launching a premium product so you have channels to scale. Tempo also includes public communications. Announcing a move too early allows competitors to preempt you. Revealing too late forfeits first impression benefits. Control information release strategically and use staged disclosures to shape perception. Another element is operational tempo. Can your team handle a rapid surge in demand, or will speed expose quality weaknesses that erode trust? If internal capacity is limited, slow the market tempo rather than the product quality. Finally, master adaptive tempo by building monitoring signals that allow you to speed up when leading indicators flash green and to pause when friction surfaces. Tempo is not rash haste. It is disciplined rhythm that synchronizes internal capability with external opportunity, so your moves compound rather than dissipate. Chapter 13. Platform and Ecosystem Strategy. Winning at scale increasingly means building platforms and ecosystems rather than single products. A platform creates infrastructure where others can build value that in turn accrues to the platform owner. Begin by identifying the core interaction your platform would enable and the minimum viable ecosystem that makes the interaction valuable: a buyer, a seller, a connector, or a data stream. Design initial incentives to seed participation, subsidize early producers, provide superior primitive tools, or create low-friction on-ramps that reduce switching costs. Critical to platform strategy is solving the chicken and egg problem. Pick a side to prioritize early and create irresistible first-order value for that group so the other side follows. Invest in governance early with simple rules that balance openness with quality control. Platforms that scale without guardrails degrade into low-quality marketplaces. Also think about composability. APIs, modular components, and clear documentation make it easy for partners to extend your platform in ways you could not predict. Position your platform to capture the structural economics. Network effects increase marginal returns as participation rises, and data externalities create feedback loops that improve core services. Beware platform envelopment by larger incumbents. Protect your strategic core and build defensible assets, exclusive partnerships, differentiated data, or unique community trust. Platform strategy is long-term and requires patience and capital discipline. Treat early losses as investments in a system that, if it works, will create persistent advantage. Chapter 14. Strategic Partnerships and Alliances. No strategy exists in a vacuum. Alliances multiply, reach, and reduce risk. Partnerships are powerful but fragile. They must be negotiated as strategic instruments with clear mutual value rather than vague goodwill. Start by mapping potential partners who control distribution, credibility, or complementary capability you lack. Design propositions that are simple and reciprocal. What can you do for them in exchange for access or capability? Use pilot collaborations to validate fit before scaling commitments. Structure agreements with short feedback cycles and clear exit triggers so both sides can learn without being trapped. Trust is the currency of alliances. Build small, dependable actions that create trust early. A reliable data swap, a co-branded pilot, or a shared implementation team, then escalate scope as mutual confidence grows. Align incentives through joint metrics that tie success to mutual outcomes rather than one-sided gains. Also create governance rituals, regular executive touchpoints, operational liaisons. Chapter 15. Innovation strategy, balancing exploration and exploitation. Strategic innovators manage the tension between exploitation of current advantages and exploration of new opportunities. Exploitation funds growth now, exploration seeds future options. Build a portfolio approach where a fixed percentage of resources is allocated to exploration experiments while the rest optimizes core operations. Create separate but connected structures, small autonomous teams that can move fast with distinct metrics, and a central integration function that translates successful experiments back into the core. Protect exploration from performance metrics that kill creativity. Evaluate experiments on learning value as well as direct outcomes. Use lightweight stage gates to prune projects quickly and redirect capital to winners. Encourage serendipity by creating cross-functional forums where people from different domains share problems and insights. Many strategic breakthroughs happen at disciplinary intersections. Chapter 16. Risk management and strategic. Hedging, strategy without risk management, is reckless. Hedging is not about eliminating risk but about shaping downside so strategic moves remain reversible. Begin with scenario-based tail risk analysis. What sequences of events would cause catastrophic loss, and then design hedges that are inexpensive relative to the potential exposure. These can be financial instruments, contractual protections, diversification of suppliers, staged investment tranches, or partnerships that share downside. Use small experiments to reduce informational risk before large commitments. Another approach is redundancy in critical systems, dual suppliers, mirrored data centers, or overlapping capabilities that increase resilience while accepting a modest efficiency cost. Run regular stress tests that simulate supply shocks, demand collapses, or reputation crises so you can rehearse responses. Align incentives with prudence. Ensure that bonuses and incentive plans do not reward short-term gain at the expense of systemic risk. Finally, maintain mental hedges. Plan contingencies that preserve optionality such as reserve capital and minimal viable revenue streams that survive stress. Strategic hedging preserves the ability to act when others are paralyzed and converts turbulence into opportunity. Chapter 17. Ethical strategy and long-term legitimacy. Sustainable advantage requires legitimacy. Ethical strategy means aligning short-term moves with long-term social license, so your gains are durable and not easily reversed by regulatory, reputational, or consumer backlash. Begin by mapping stakeholders beyond shareholders, employees, customers, suppliers, communities, and regulators, and evaluate how strategic choices affect each group. Design practices that are transparent and fair, build simple accountability mechanisms, and be proactive in addressing foreseeable harms. Invest in compliance and in ethical review early. Retroactive fixes are costly. Transparency and consistent communication build trust. When errors occur, own them quickly and take corrective action. Align reward systems with long-term value creation, not short-term extraction. Firms that internalize these norms earn the right to operate at scale and avoid the boom and bust cycles of extractive models. Ethical strategy is not charity. It is a pragmatic recognition that legitimacy compounds like capital and that today's shortcuts can become tomorrow's liabilities. Chapter 18. Strategic culture and the habit of thinking ahead. Culture is strategy's most reliable amplifier or its deadliest trap. Build a culture that prizes thinking ahead by embedding simple rituals, regular scenario sessions, decision journals that record trade-offs and outcomes, and leadership habits that model curiosity and humility. Promote psychological safety so people surface uncomfortable signals early, and reward candor and disciplined dissent. Hire for cognitive diversity and create structures that force cross-pollination between domains. Institutionalize learning cycles, post-mortems that are blameless and forward-looking, and maintain a public repository of insights so the organization accumulates memory rather than repeating mistakes. Finally, cultivate temporal empathy. Teach people to consider downstream consequences and to value optionality. A culture that thinks ahead makes strategy a living capability rather than a document on a shelf, and turns individual foresight into collective advantage. Chapter 19. Scaling. Strategy. From playbook to system. Scaling strategy is less about grand plans and more about turning repeated success into reliable systems that survive people and moments. Many organizations stumble when a founder's intuition stops fitting the size of the problem. Scaling asks you to translate tacit knowledge into institutional practice, so performance no longer depends on a single heroic individual. Start by identifying the handful of decisions and behaviors that produced your early wins, those few moves that reliably create outsized result. Codify them into playbooks that are short, executable, and designed for imperfect operators. A playbook is not a novel, it is a sequence of observable steps, key heuristics, decision boundaries, and explicit escalation rules. The next critical layer is tooling. Create simple dashboards that surface the leading indicators those playbooks were implicitly tracking. Automation should reduce noise, not create more meetings. Delegate authority with bounded autonomy. Grant decision rights close to the work, but define clear failure modes and recovery protocols so local speed does not become systemic risk. Institutionalize feedback loops so the playbooks evolve. Run monthly calibration sessions where teams compare outcomes to playbook assumptions and update rules based on real outcomes. This keeps doctrine elastic rather than fossilized. Talent systems must align with scaling. Hire for teachability and pattern recognition, then accelerate onboarding with apprenticeship sprints that pair new hires with veterans on live tasks until competence is observed. Reward mechanisms matter. Shift from celebrating rare individual heroics to amplifying steady process improvement. Small, repeatable gains compound and should be visible in compensation, recognition, and promotion. Governance is the final binder. Create a lightweight strategy committee that meets quarterly to assess domain shifts and resource allocation, empowered to prune initiatives quickly rather than hoarding projects. Avoid the false trade-off of standardization versus innovation by creating modularity. Core systems handle repeatable tasks while autonomous cells run bounded experiments that, if validated, are templated into the core. Pay attention to capacity ceilings. Scale in steps that preserve quality by increasing capability before demand. Lastly, prepare for cultural metamorphosis. Scaling requires shifting language, rituals, and incentives, so new hires inherit the strategic mindsets you value. Communicate the why behind the playbooks and keep decision journals public, so institutional memory accumulates. When you convert hard-won patterns into simple, maintained systems, you create durable advantage. Scaling ceases to be a gamble and becomes an engineered outcome that multiplies your initial edge across time and people. Chapter 20. Strategic Judgment. Developing wise deciders. The last mile of strategy is judgment, the ability to choose wisely when models fail, data are incomplete, and stakes are high. Judgment blends analytic rigor with moral clarity, pattern fluency, and the courage to act when uncertainty is stubborn. Begin by cultivating calibrated confidence. Collect small wins through fast experiments to ground intuition, but keep score of misses to avoid arrogance. Use decision journals to externalize rationale and outcomes. Over time, they become a training corpus that sharpens pattern recognition and reveals cognitive blind spots. Train judgment by exposing leaders to structured stretch experiences, rotations in different functions, simulations of crisis scenarios, and staged dilemmas that require rapid trade-offs. Pair those experiences with debriefs focused on reasoning, not outcomes, to separate luck from skill. Encourage tactical dissidents, appoint contrarian roles whose job is to surface alternative scenarios and to stress test prevailing assumptions. Institutionalizing dissent forces groups to refine arguments and improves resilience. Moral courage is central. Good strategy sometimes asks you to forego short-term gain to preserve long-term legitimacy, embed ethical checkpoints in major decisions, and require explicit stakeholder impact assessments. Another pillar is tempo mastery. Teach leaders how to sense when speed is the asset and when patience compounds advantage, and give them pre-authorized thresholds to act so bureaucracy does not stifle timely judgment. Mentorship accelerates judgment transfer. Senior leaders should coach juniors through real decisions, sharing not just what they chose, but how they weighed ambiguity and values. Finally, protect psychological bandwidth. Wise decision-making thrives on clarity and rest, not on crisis mode adrenaline. Institutional practices that enforce reflection windows, limit meeting sprawl, and preserve deep work are investments in collective judgment. Strategic judgment is less a trait and more a discipline. You grow by designing experiences, feedback, and moral architecture that educate leaders to see trade-offs clearly, feel appropriate responsibility, and choose with courage even when the future resists neat models. Conclusion: your first strategic moves today. Strategy is not a certificate or a 100-page plan. It is a daily practice of seeing the field, finding leverage, and building simple systems that outlast mood and moment. To make this practical, do 3 things this week. First, draw your playing field. List the actors, incentives, and a single asymmetry you can exploit with a small, piloted action. Second, create a 1-page playbook for that action. Steps, decision boundaries, and 1 leading indicator you will watch. Third, schedule a 30-minute reflection loop in 7 days to review outcomes, extract learning, and either scale the play or stop it quickly. Repeat these microcycles, and you will convert reactive choices into compounding advantage. Strategy rewards the patient and punishes frantic motion. Learn to pause, map, and then move with deliberate tempo. Start small, keep learning, and design your life and work so decisions count for more than effort.